Today, we're diving into a really personal journey, an exploration into where belief itself comes from. But what's interesting is that this story doesn't start with someone wanting to tear faith down. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It begins with a desperate hope for it all to be true. Let's get into it. This right here, this single sentence is everything. It really sets the stage for what's at stake emotionally. The author wasn't on some mission to debunk their own beliefs. No, they were holding on tight, hoping with everything they had that faith was real. This whole quest, it didn't start in the head. It started deep in the heart.
So, a desperate hope, where does that even come from? Well, this first section gets right to it, showing how the author's motivation was born from one of the most powerful human experiences there is: grief. You know, loss has this incredible way of making huge, abstract questions feel intensely personal and incredibly urgent. For the author, the date of a loved one's 21st birthday was looming, and it just changed everything. Suddenly, big theological ideas weren't just theories anymore. Questions like, is any of this real, and will I see him again? They weren't just intellectual exercises. They were the very foundation of hope itself. And this really points to something universal, doesn't it? When you're in the middle of chaos and pain, faith can be a lifeline. It provides this essential framework for meaning and offers this profound reassurance that suffering isn't the end of the story. And for the author, that's exactly the role belief played, just like it has for so many people throughout history.
Okay, but just because you want something to be true, that doesn't make it so. And this brings us to a huge turning point in the story, where the author's professional life and their personal search for truth started to collide in a way they really didn't see coming.
So this is where the author's day job becomes super important. See, they spent years analyzing what are called consequential texts. Think legal contracts, things where every single word, every comma matters immensely. In that world, you have to understand a document's structure, its origin, its intent. And you can't just turn that kind of analytical brain off when you go home and pick up another book. And this is the big switch, right? Reading devotionally is all about finding comfort in what it means to you. But reading structurally like a lawyer or a historian, it forces you to ask a totally different set of questions. You go from asking, what does this mean for me, to asking, wait a minute, what did this actually mean when it was written and why? It changes everything. Once that new lens was in place, well, it was like a dam breaking. All of these questions that are totally normal in any other field of study, suddenly became impossible for the author to just push aside. First up, the most basic question you'd ask about any historical document. Who really wrote this? Not just who does tradition say wrote it, but where's the evidence? And then you've got to think about context. I mean, a text written for a small, persecuted group in the first century is going to have a very different purpose than one written for a powerful state religion 300 years later. The audience completely changes the message. From there, the questions just get bigger. The author started seeing these amazing patterns, similar myths, similar hero journeys, popping up in cultures that supposedly never even met. It suggested that maybe these stories had a much more, human origin.
And all of this leads to the one massive question that kind of hangs over everything. When you really look at the inconsistencies, the evolving morals, the all-too-human flaws of gods and prophets, does it all point to a perfect, divine plan? Or does it look a lot more like something people made?
So you'd think this flood of questions would just lead to despair, right? A total crisis of faith. But instead, it led to a surprising discovery. The author started to see a very clear, very consistent pattern emerging from all the evidence. One of the most striking things was realizing that profound morality exists completely outside of religion. The author met people who acted with deep compassion, with integrity, who were committed to making the world a better place, all without any divine commandment or promise of heaven. And that makes you ask a really quiet but powerful question. If morality can thrive without religion, what is religion actually doing? And this brings us right to the book's main point. It's not a claim that God doesn't exist. It's actually a much more focused, evidence-based argument that the stories, the rules, the structures we see in religions all over the world, they're explained much more compellingly as human inventions, things we created to meet our own deep psychological and social needs. So if the goal isn't to attack faith, then what is it? Well, the author's real goal is to simply encourage an honest, responsible look at the very foundations of belief itself. The argument here is simple, but really powerful. Most of us get our core beliefs long before we have the tools to really think them through, right? They're inherited. So taking the time as an adult to really look at those beliefs, that's not an act of betrayal. It's an act of intellectual responsibility. It's just an honest attempt to understand why you believe what you believe.
And that is the final, thought-provoking question we're left with. It's not about whether your faith is right or wrong. It's about how it was formed. It shifts the whole conversation away from defending a conclusion and toward just examining the process, inviting every one of us to think about our own journey of belief.